Prehistoric Planet recently dropped today, so of course the ocean one. Some things that I noticed when watching this one compared to the coasts episode is that the lighting in the coast episode was not the greatest a good chunk of the time. Often it was very dark and stuff, which I get because obviously the further down you go into the ocean, the harder it is to see. But it kind of got to a point where it was still almost too hard to see it, especially compared to here. I think also here, I just really like landscape shots. It's really cool to see the landscape shots of the deserts and these other arid and dry areas compared to the ocean, where you can tell that a good chunk of it is CGI, including the environments are CGI. Versus here, you can tell that these landscapes are actually there. So obviously, I'll talk a little more about the actual episode this time versus the last time. This episode starts off with showing Dreadnoughtus. I don't know if I'm saying that right. The Pompadour. No. This episode starts off showing with Dreadnoughtus, which is the big sauropod that they recently found in South America. It also makes an appearance in the new Jurassic World movie that's coming up soon. It's also the one that you see all the little neck sacs inflating. It was really cool because it kind of showed a mating battle, almost kind of like elephant seals between two males. And I really liked it. It was cool to see like these big giant animals just going at it and like almost kind of using similar tactics as and was trying to emulate. In Walking with Dinosaurs, it didn't always have to have music going. It did have some great musical pieces in it, but it also took time to be like, hey, you don't have to have music. We'll just let the scene play out, just let the animals and the sounds just kind of immerse you. Versus here, when these two males are fighting, you can barely hear the sounds they're making because the music by Hans Zimmer is so loud. And I mentioned it in the first episode, but there are certain scenes where the music is kind of obnoxious and almost kind of distracts. And I think for me personally, I really like that they do, just kind of like in real life, Tarbosaurus did look pretty similar to T-Rex, but it actually had a slightly narrower skull. And here we see the same thing. You can tell that the skull is T-Rex, but Asian. We also get to see the lovely Velociraptor and not the ones from Jurassic Park or Jurassic World. It's so nice to finally see some realistic looking, accurate Velociraptors. The last that I can think of, or at least the one that comes to mind, is probably Planet Dinosaur, and even those aren't fully accurate that I can think of personally. But we get to kind of see them. We only see one clip with them. And I've seen in the trailer you see them later in another episode. So I wonder if they're gonna kind of show the same animals around the planet, maybe just at different times. Because they showed the T-Rex in the coast episode, but I know it's gonna appear later in the forest episode because you can see clips of it in the trailer. So I think that book from 2016 with the water truce, if you remember that movie, which is ironically directed by Jon Favreau. And I think that's kind of almost why he took on that project, and the Lion King remake was almost kind of test the technology to see if he could make a documentary. Because I know he produced this series, which honestly producers kind of varies on how much their involvement is. I mean, Steven Spielberg has produced all the Michael Bay Transformers movies, so that kind of says that. But it's really cool to see these different animals interacting with each other in a way that almost reminds me of, like, if you could go on a safari to Africa or look up a YouTube video of just different animals at a watering hole just drinking. I think just seeing different animals interact with each other, not necessarily always having to hunt or fight, or a Therizinosaurus in the background, unfortunately didn't get much screen time. Maybe it'll appear later, but I'm going to be honest, even though it was on screen for maybe like 2 seconds, I was like, it's a Therizinosaurus! Which was kind of how people react to the documentary, which is focusing solely on the dinosaurs in this case. So I feel like it's, for someone to get excited by seeing, their favorite dinosaur here is a lot different than Jurassic World, because you don't look at this documentary and be like, this having this dinosaur is all it's got for it. That's the whole purpose of creating this documentary. I gotta say, the star for me of this show was Dinosaur. It was in for just a little bit, but it was the one that gets killed by the Oviraptor. But it was kind of cool to be like, hey, I recognize that from my childhood, but in this new modern look, and I really like the design that they went with a barn owl coloring. Really kind of fits the theme of how they talk about in this episode, of how this animal was able to have excellent hearing, and that's how it was using it to detect its prey, termites, and other small insects. So I thought that was pretty cool. But I think just all the scenes involving it, I think they were done well. It's always cool to see animals that you don't always know a ton about, and they're not just like the big scary carnivore or the big herbivore. Like, it's something a lot smaller, and maybe something that a lot of people would overlook or not really know about. So I'm glad that they're bringing attention to these kind of dinosaurs that aren't really known by the mainstream public. That's probably one of my favorite things about dinosaur and just animal documentaries, or just documentaries in general, is when they bring attention to these lesser known organisms that most people don't know about. And that's why I really like it, because you're like, whoa, I didn't know that this creature did that, or I didn't know that this type of creature existed. I think that's one of the great things about documentaries is, yes, you can make a documentary about, T-Rex or whatever, but more people will probably learn something about Mononychus, be like, whoa, that's cool, I didn't know that there was a dinosaur that behaved like that. So that's always one of my personal favorite things about documentaries, and seeing the new information that you take away from Barbadoculus, I'm pretty sure is what they said it was called. But they would have, the males had these like huge crests and stuff, at least the large males, and it was cool seeing them almost kind of replicate some behavior. And I just thought it was funny because, haha, sus. So yeah, that's kind of the thing about this episode. I liked it more personally. I think it looks a lot better. That's probably the biggest thing. I also just like learning about the difference and stuff. I think also the creatures just in here generally interested me more than the first one. Not to say the first episode didn't have interesting creatures, it did, but just more personally, I find it more interesting to learn about like Mononychus, an obscure dinosaur, versus like T-Rex again, even if it's done well. And that's the thing, in the behind the scenes, he mentions that they've known that pterosaurs have existed for over 200 years, and yet they recently made these discoveries relating to the large head crests that you see in this episode. And the thing is that, like, for all the knowledge that we know on this planet, whether about living organisms or extinct ones, we're constantly learning more information about them. And to me, that's one of the great things about this planet, is that no matter how much we know, there's always something new.